Hello and welcome to this webinar on our transparency rules. I hope you're all doing okay and coping with lockdown. I have to say that as the evenings get lighter and blossom starts appearing on the trees, I'm feeling a bit more positive, although that is perhaps counterbalanced by how negative I'm feeling about my lack of haircut, or particularly the mullet that seems to be emerging behind my head. Now, that is the advantage of this webinar. We're in 2D, so I can hide it. But of course, today's session isn't about hiding. It's about being open and upfront, and that is our transparency rules. Now, I'm sure that everyone who is joining us is already complying with our transparency rules, but we know some firms, particularly smaller firms, can find some of the nuances a bit tricky. There's a few grey areas, and we also appreciate that during the pandemic, that's thrown up lots of new things, lots of new challenges and difficulties for firms. So we want to support you to help you get it right, make compliance as easy as possible. So this session is very much going to focus on practical tips to help you comply. So to help me us do that, I'm joined by Natalie, who works in our policy team, the team that developed these rule changes. And we also have Paul, who has been involved in the process of checking how firms are doing in this area. And he'll be focusing on some insights on good practice, as well as some common mistakes we see. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some presentations, but then at the end, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And actually, you should see there's a link below this webinar. You can click on that and you could submit your questions to us either anonymously, or we're happy to hear your name, and we'll try and get through as many of those questions at the end as possible. We've also had some questions come in advance, so thank you for those. So we'll come to those as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Natalie.
So I'm just going to start by reflecting on why it is we put in place the rules, which have been around now for a few years. Were implemented in December 2018. And one of the reasons is that we found that there was a lack of information for consumers to really help navigate the market and make informed choices. And we know from our research that people really want to shop around. A lot of people spend over an hour researching options, but it was quite difficult for them to really find information about their provider. So in terms of what we've actually done, moving on, we have essentially published, we've required firms to publish price and descriptions of key legal services, their complaints procedures, including details of the legal ombudsman and our details, the SRA. We've created a clickable logo for firms to use on their website, and we've also launched a solicitors register about firms and solicitors that we regulate. So just a quick reminder of the services that are covered by the rules. So this slide here shows that the services that are subject to price and service transparency. And so the price and service rules apply if firms publish the availability of any of these legal services on their website. Moving on to price, we're going to show you a little bit more detail surrounding the extensive guidance and case study examples that we've got on our website. But this slide essentially sets out what you need to be publishing on your website. So really, it's essentially clear and accessible cost information in a prominent place is the key facet of it, but also including the basis for costs, details of disbursements, and whether services attract VAT. And the rate of that, which is something that sometimes gets missed off. Moving on to the complaints procedures. So essentially, you need to publish your own complaints procedure, as I've mentioned, but also details of how clients can complain to the legal ombudsman and to us. And we've produced a template with example wording that can be adapted and used to make this as easy as possible. And that's available on our website also. And finally, the last facet of our rules is in relation to the clickable logo. So this is a regulated by the SRA logo that is displayed on the website of firms that we regulate. Only firms can use the logo, and it really helps to signal to the public that the firm is regulated by us. It helps people know that the website is genuine and help the public better understand the protections that apply when using a regulated provider. And that logo is delivered by our partner Yoshki as well. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Paul, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how we've been enforcing the rules.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, and good afternoon, everyone. So essentially, we just want to see firms get this right so that consumers and small businesses have all the information they need to make an informed choice. To review this area, we've been relying on two main tools, so that's web sweeps and declarations. Throughout 2020, we've reviewed firm websites to check whether all the relevant information is available. So this includes our clickable logo, the service and cost information, and the required complaints information that Natalie's just run through. We're calling this a web sweep. We've also been asking firms to declare that they're compliant with the rules, but I'm going to come on to this a bit more in future. Overall, we tend to find that most firms have taken steps to comply with our rules and the absolute levels of non-compliance are very low. So let's have a look now at some specific areas and what we expect to see. So good practice. Charging basis. Essentially, are you providing enough information to consumers to enable them to make an informed choice? Have you explained whether you're offering a fixed fee or work on an hourly basis? Not only do we expect this information to be made available, but recent literature has also shown that it helps to generate work. We also know that a quarter of all complaints dealt with by the legal ombudsman relate to costs. So it's clear that if you get this right at the beginning, then that can help avoid confusion and later issues. Credentials. Publish the qualifications and experience of anyone carrying out the work and of their supervisors. This, after all, is an opportunity to showcase the skills and experience that you and your staff have and will help to distinguish between you and the competition. Information about individuals or teams also doesn't need to be in the same place. So quite often I'll have a look at a firm website and we'll see something about biographies or a who's who section. That's perfectly fine. Disbursements. Highlight the likely disbursements and their costs. Is there a possibility that they may change? Ultimately, potential clients want to know how much it's going to cost, and it needs to be clear and transparent information about disbursements that will make them make sensible choices. Next up, we've got VAT. So be clear about VAT. We require firms to be open and transparent about VAT. This includes either providing a specific breakdown of any additional sum added on for VAT, or alternatively, an indication of the current VAT levels. So that is literally stating VAT is 20%. Complaints. Our rules require firms to provide their complaints process and contact details for the legal ombudsman and us. So firms should also make sure that they explain how long clients have to make a complaint to the legal ombudsman. And that is an area that I think sometimes we see firms struggling with. And then finally, location. So these requirements are designed to help consumers understand more about the services they can expect to receive. The information should be available in a clear and prominent place. And while each website will be different, we don't want to see information hidden away in areas that are difficult to locate. So having had a look at my fair share now of firm websites, there are still times when I'll speak to a firm and say, I can't find this information. And they'll say, Paul, it's down here on this link at the bottom. Now, having looked at literally hundreds of websites, if I can't see it, I do wonder how easy is it going to be for a consumer. Finally, check and double check the information that you've published. So do your links actually work? You've done all the hard work, you've got all the information together, but have you actually now published on your website? Another thing that sometimes we see as well is where more than one individual has been responsible for producing the information. So say a different page, depending on which area you're discussing. Do all those different areas make sense and are they compliant? So for example, I will see from time to time firms having a compliant conveyancing page, but then perhaps not a different page, or the information about complaints isn't accurate. Make sure that all the areas, regardless of who they're written by, are up to speed and compliant. Also consider what areas you're providing information about. So we regularly see websites which contain a brief reference to a specific area of work. So for example, we'll see someone say, we also carry out debt collection work. Please contact our office to discuss this further. Now, if you publish that you work in that area in passing, we'll still expect to see all of the relevant information provided. So what's next? Well, as you can guess, this area remains really important to us, and our ongoing commitment to carry out declaration work reflects that. We're currently writing to firms and asking them to confirm that they are compliant with our transparency rules, and we're referring to this as the declarations exercise. So from July 2020 all the way through to July 2021, we'll be reaching approximately 2,000 firms. Not only does this allow us to check that firms are getting it right, but it also makes sure that there's a level playing field out there. So we already know that this takes time, money and effort to get right, and we want to make sure that everyone is doing it. We've already engaged with co-ops at around 1,600 firms from across the profession, and this exercise has involved everybody that we regulate, from sole practitioners all the way up to large city firms. The declaration document takes an average about 10 minutes to complete, and you'll also need to provide information about who you are, your firm, the area of work your firm carry out, whether you have relevant costs and service information available for each area, and whether you have appropriate information about your complaints process. There's no trick questions, and obviously help is on offer from our professional ethics team if you'd like to discuss anything further. Once each exercise is complete, we're also carrying out dip tests, so we'll be looking at a number of the responses just to check that the information we're receiving is correct. Naturally, where we discover issues or problems that are brought to our attention by firms, we'll be referring this to our Investigation and Supervision Directorate for further engagement and, where necessary, enforcement action. Now, given the large number of firms that we are contacting, I think it's fairly likely that there's a good chance we might be speaking to you or your firm. And to make this easy, one last kind of tip I would give is just make sure that the information that we hold about you on My SRA is up to speed so that we can contact you at the first chance of doing so. Finally, just about support available. So as mentioned at various points throughout, guidance, templates, and frequently asked questions are available. If you're approached during our declarations or web suite work, help is on hand to make sure we can answer those questions. And we have a dedicated inbox for queries, and the usual help is on offer from our professional ethics helpline. I think now what we'd like to do is show you just a short video that will give you an idea of where you can find some of this information on our website.
So hopefully you found that useful. Now, we said we'd have some time for questions at the end of this, and thank you to everyone who's sent in a question already. Just a reminder, you can click on the link below and submit your question. If you want to do that anonymously, you can do. So let's work through some of the questions we've had, and some we've had pre-submitted in advance as well. So firstly, there's a few questions around a clickable logo. One question we get, and we get this quite often actually, is can regulated solicitors use the clickable logo on their marketing material or on email footers or letters? So can they use it on printed material? Yeah,
I think as you say, Ben, this is one of those classic questions that we see regularly. I think first and foremost, it's not really designed to be done for that. It's to add to firm websites. So what I would say is it's about making sure that if you put it on your website, when you click onto it, it goes through to the SRA's webpage, and obviously that helps to validate who you are and the firm that you're working for, and also confirms that you're a regulated entity. Now, obviously, if we start putting that at the end of footers and things like that, the badge won't work, but also it'll dilute what we're trying to achieve, which is making it clear and transparent to people that are looking for information on websites.
Thank you, Paul. So the next question we've got is so a couple of questions. Firstly, if you have a quote generator on your website, is that good enough? And Linda, similarly, thank you, Linda, has asked the question about an online quote facility. Again, is that good enough?
I could take this one. So I think the key thing with quote generators is that if you're using one, the client should be able to generate a quote without requiring too much additional contact, for example, having to call up and discuss the quote with someone from the firm. And it's also, I think, good to sort of really think about how consumers are interacting with the data, because we've done a bit of research, and that sort of shows that individuals are less likely to use an online quote generator if they have to input large amounts of personal data. Now, taking Linda's specific question around whether or not you would also need to publish pricing information alongside a quote generator, I think, I suppose it depends on how detailed a quote you're able to generate using that facility. Because as alongside cost information, you need to sort of set out the basis for charges, any likely disbursements and their costs, being clear around VAT, for example. So if the quote generator is able to do all of that, then great. But if it's just producing a very sort of simple high level cost, then I think you'd probably need to go into a bit more detail on your website as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Now I've got, Paul, as you answered a previous question around the clickable logo, I've got another one here, which is, can you have two clickable logos? We know that some firms will have more than one website. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's absolutely fine. And as you say, Ben, this does come up quite a lot. So the first thing that we'd say is just make sure that you've gone and had a look at the frequently asked questions. They're provided by Yoshki, which is one of our specialist partners, and they help us with the clickable badge. There's a whole range of information there about what we can do to make sure that we're displaying the right information. And one of the things that we look at is the ability to do one badge across 2 different websites. So what you'll need to do is register your website first of all in my SRA and make sure that all the information is there first, and then secondly you go to Yoshki and confirm with them which websites you're interested in attaching to the badge. And then I think finally it's 5 working days before you'll see any changes, so just make sure that you leave enough time, because obviously if we check the website and the badge isn't there, then that's going to be an issue.
Thank you, Paul. And I've got a question now for you, Natalie. What if there's a range of costs, and obviously sometimes legal services, they're complex and it might not be possible to actually pinpoint an individual cost? How do you make sure that's meaningful and make sure you're complying while publishing a range of costs?
So I think, I suppose the key thing about a range of costs is if it is too broad, it's going to be quite difficult for the client to really ascertain. It's going to be quite difficult for the client to ascertain like how much their particular matter might cost. So I think alongside a range, it would be wise to think about the basis for the costs, setting that out. But I think if it is quite broad, then you might want to include some illustrative examples or some case studies so people can really get a sense of what it might cost for them.
But Ben, could I just also add, having spoken to a number of firms as well, I think it's really clear that we make sure that firms realise that there's a commercial interest in them for doing this as well. So we already know that a large degree of firms would recommend putting this information on the website in the first place. And that actually, having done a lot of the web sweeps myself, you see that firms are now starting to produce some of this information on a voluntary basis for areas that we hadn't originally discussed. And I think that kind of reflects the idea that actually, if you get this right and you give people the information to make a sensible choice, you're more likely to gather new clients and new work. So for me, it's probably less about what is the minimum level that we can do and how broad can we leave it, because we're a bit scared about putting down detail in case that raises serious questions. And actually thinking, well, this is an opportunity for us to showcase what we're doing and how we're doing it and what it might cost and invite more work.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Paul. And it's probably a good point to come to you, Natalie, actually, on we've recently ran an evaluation, haven't we, of the transparency rules. I think it's towards the end of last year to look at the impact after the first year. And I suppose that comes with the big caveat that it's early days. But what did that show? And did it show there are benefits to the fact that with more people publishing price information?
I think it's really interesting because we did quite an extensive survey with a large group of consumers, and also a parallel survey with over 500 firms. And the sort of findings were quite different on the consumer side as compared to the solicitor side. So consumers told us that the majority of them looked at price information on the website and they found it really useful. But conversely, most solicitors that we spoke to thought that consumers didn't really look at the website at all before instructing them, so tended to think that the website was of lesser value than it actually was. I suppose another key thing that it highlighted was that only 10% of consumers that we surveyed thought that solicitors were unaffordable. So I think that's really quite a positive finding. And I think with more transparency, people are starting to realise that that solicitors are a viable option for them, and starting to sort of really consider that.
So the key point there, Natalie, is just to check my understanding of that, is so the public thought solicitors were more expensive than they actually are. Yeah, and by publishing this information, actually it's helping members realise, oh, actually it might not be quite as pricey as I originally thought.
That's absolutely right. And then there are a few things that came through, sort of areas for improvement. So just over a third of solicitors said that there was a bit too much legal jargon on websites. So I think that might be something to sort of go away and think about, and just have a look on your website and make sure that it's using sort of plain English as much as possible, and that any sort of more specialist terms are sort of defined, so it's easier for the consumers to navigate.
Thanks, Natalie. We've had another question from Tanya, and it's sort of, I think it may be sort of steps slightly outside the transparency rules, but I can definitely see how it's linked. She's asked, do you need to disclose the exact percentage of your referral fee to your clients, or is advising them that there is a referral fee, is that enough? Natalie, is that one you could answer maybe?
Yes, I can answer that. So the code does not specifically require solicitors to disclose the amount that they pay as a referral fee. So you'd simply need to inform the client being referred of details of any fee sharing agreement. But because we've got the principle 4 in the code of conduct around being honest and upfront with clients, I think if the client actually asked you outright how much you were being paid, I think you'd need to disclose that.
Okay, that's great. Paul, I wanted to come to a question with you on the sort of enforcement side. So I think you mentioned there the sort of declarations and web sweeps are the sort of two main things we're doing in that area. Just for clarity, are we going to continue doing that over the coming months, and both of those things?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and there's basically two parts to this. I think the first thing obviously is the proactive work that we're undertaking. So the declarations work is ongoing, I think all the way until July 2021 at least, and we're contacting hundreds of firms about that and trying to make sure that they've got the information in place. But in addition to that, there's also our reactive work as well. So obviously we do receive reports from other law firms and consumers and other bodies just to say that I've checked this person's website and the information you've asked for doesn't appear to be available. So again, we're going to be looking at that information more clearly. But I think the big thing for us at this moment is just to say, well, it's not about us punishing people for the rules. It's about making sure that that information is there and working with people to try and fix it. So I think that there is a degree of kind of nervousness around this. But first and foremost, we just want to make sure that the information is available for consumers. And we're happy to work with them to try and make sure that that's on there.
And I think in the long term, obviously, in terms of our approach, that will very much be driven, I imagine, by what we find out there. And if everyone's complying and everyone seems to be doing a good job, then the need for us to keep on checking this stuff is probably going to reduce. We did have a question from David asking around sort of, will we be publishing stats on sort of compliance levels in certain areas? I think probably our approach there will be, we'll continue like you've done today, Paul, to highlight areas where we see firms are finding difficulties or also good practice as well, so that people can look at to see whether they can learn from that, and maybe those grey areas, make sure they're complying there. So let's move on to another. We've got another question linked to the clickable logo, and I think our rules talk about sort of it being available and sort of clear and prominent. What do we mean by sort of clear and prominent?
I can take this one if you want, Ben. So this is one of those. This is one of those classic questions where if I had £1 for every time I heard this, I would be a very rich man. First and foremost, clear and prominent. I don't think we've ever actually defined it, and that reflects actually that each of the firms that we go and speak with and each of the websites we look at are all very different. And so actually, it's very difficult for us to come up with a single term of saying, well, what do we mean by clear and prominent? But what I can say is, having had a look at a fair amount of law firm websites, if you're hiding it away down on a hyperlink in your terms and conditions, that for me probably isn't meeting the standards that we require. And it comes back again to just that idea of, if you give people enough information about costs and services, they're more likely to use you as a provider as well. So what I would say is, rather than trying to look at it as a kind of minimum level of this is what the rules require, you can make more of it. And when we go and have a look at firms, you can often see that there are people that have kind of latched onto this idea and thought, well, this for us is a marketing concept as well. Like, this is an opportunity for us to say, look at how well we can do this, look at our costs, look at our services, but also look at our qualifications of the people that we're working with. We've got some great people, and come to our firm and this is what we'll be able to do for you. And that's where I would suggest people aim for, rather than trying to meet the minimum requirements of what is specifically required under the rules.
And I seem to remember when we consulted on this, and it is probably over 3 years ago now, actually the clickable logo was quite popular because it's that chance to promote the fact that the extra protections you get, the extra sort of safety net you get from using a regulated firm, whether it's the insurance or whether it's that knowing that there's regulation there and that there's sort of expert solicitors involved in that firm. So we've had a question just come in, so thank you for sending that in. Is about whether published prices are binding when a client then approaches with the specifics. So yeah, are you then bound in, or actually, if somebody comes in with a particularly complex case, what happens there? Natalie, perhaps come to you on that one.
I suppose it depends very much on the type of case that we're talking about. So if it's quite a straightforward legal service, you'll probably be able to provide a total cost which would be reflective of what was going to be charged in practice. But we also understand that sometimes matters can be quite complex. So in that sort of scenario, you might want to think about putting in a range, or a range of costs, or an average, and just sort of making it clear that there could be differences once the client actually approaches you with the full details. But I think trying to be as accurate as possible and as clear and upfront as possible is definitely the way to go.
Could I just add some more, Ben, on that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think, having spoken to a number of firms, I think there's kind of a fear that actually what happens is we publish our prices and then that's it. Consumers will literally just pick off the prices that we put on the website, and there'll be no room to actually do anything further. And I don't think that's our experience and what we've seen from consumers when we've done the research. So for example, if you've got this information available, it's more likely that clients are going to use your services anyway. So maybe think about doing that as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. And just another one, could you just have a reminder around where you get help to get the clickable logo working? So what should you do if you need help with that?
So we've got a website page dedicated to the clickable logo, which you can access through the resources link that we showed you earlier on. And through that, you can get redirected to the Yoshki website, and they have a specific email address. You can contact them for support if you're having any sort of issues in practice. They've also got an FAQ guide as well that sets out quite a number of the commonly asked technical questions related to the software.
That's great. Now, one thing I suppose, so we just had a question come in, and Natalie or Paul, put your hand up if you want to take this one. Somebody's asked to clarify if every firm must publish complaints or just those covered by the price areas. So does that apply to all firms, or just if you're underneath the sort of price transparency rules and offering those services? So the complaints procedure rules apply to all firms. So just to clarify, it's the price and service requirements that are particular to the 7 areas of law that I set out earlier on. But the 2 facets of our rules that apply to everyone are the clickable logo and the complaints procedure details. Well, thank you for that question, because I think that's a really useful point to clarify. So thank you for the person who sent that question in. I suppose one thing, and we're sort of, I think, moving towards the end of our webinar on this, but I suppose in terms of what's coming up, Natalie, there is work that's happening at the moment looking at quality sort of indicators. And I know when we consulted originally on these changes, one thing we tried to explore was, can we, is there stuff we could do around information around quality? And that didn't end up going into the transparency rules that we decided on. However, we are looking at the moment, aren't we, of running a pilot, working with comparison websites and seeing what perhaps are the pros and cons or risks or opportunities around getting better information through comparison websites. Could you tell us a bit about that, Natalie?
Sure. So one of our key areas of focus is going to be on increasing the amount of comparable information on quality for law firms, to help consumers really make judgments about that, because we know that they find it very difficult in practice. So in February, we've actually launched a quality indicators pilot in collaboration with Silex, the BSB, and the Council for Licensed Conveyancers. And this is just to trial various approaches. So we've been working with law firms, DCTs, and both consumer and firm representative bodies, focusing initially on conveyancing and employment law, but we might extend it to other areas such as family law, but as the work progresses. So in the first phase of the pilot, we're really exploring approaches to increasing the numbers of consumers leaving reviews. And one of the things that came out in the evaluation actually was that consumers really value reviews, and particularly reviews on law firm websites actually. but the number of people actually sort of leaving them is quite low. So we're sort of trying to really develop that, and that's more about the quality of customer service. But I think later on in the pilot, we'll also think about how we can really use comparable data on quality and make that available to consumers in relation to technical quality. And we plan to test and adapt that in order to build an understanding of what works for different consumers and what works for different legal service areas as well, because each area of law is different. So this will help us make sure that if we do sort of make any sort of permanent interventions in this particular area, it will be very proportionate and very targeted, and it should work.
Yeah, and I think we genuinely don't. We want to get the evidence before we actually decide whether this is the place where we want to do more work or whether we want to hold off. And actually, if you're listening to this and you're interested in this pilot, I think there's more than 80 firms or law firms who have already got involved in that pilot. But you can have a look at the quality indicators section on our website, and you can find out more detail about how to get involved there and what comparison websites are involved. I'd also strongly recommend actually go and have a look at a webinar we ran just a few weeks ago. It's on our YouTube channel, talking about this particular pilot and also answering those questions, because there are concerns in this area, such as things like fake reviews, or if somebody posts a really negative review that it isn't entirely true, perhaps how should you deal with that? So it addresses those types of questions. But as I say, we've got a genuinely open mind, but the more people who get involved and engage with that work, I think the better evidence we'll have to decide on where we might want to go in that space. So I think we're gonna tie things up there. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Hopefully we got through quite a lot of them. If we didn't get through your question, or if you have a particular sort of case or detailed case where you want to talk through specifically what to do in your situation, as Paul said, please phone our ethics helpline. But otherwise, thank you to Paul and Natalie. Thank you to Matt on production. My one final appeal would be if you could feedback on this webinar, it'd be really useful. There should be a link you can click on below. It only takes a couple of minutes, but if you let us know, was this useful? Did it provide you information you need? That's really helpful for us to working out whether we should do more of these type of things or whether we need to change what we do. But otherwise, I did start off this webinar heralding spring coming. Someone started mowing a lawn outside my house, so I better get off before that buzz starts coming through the webinar. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a great afternoon and you all get off now to enjoy a spot of lunch. But otherwise, thank you.